I stared at the evidence in my hands, still unable to accept the extent of the betrayal that had been meticulously woven into our life together. My name is Jonathan Braden, and I'm 34 years old. Each morning I wake up in the house I paid off through years of steady work, make coffee in the kitchen we once shared, and face another day of rebuilding what was shattered. Heather, my wife of 6 years, told me I was safe but not exciting the night she announced she was leaving for Greg Thompson, her coworker who had no idea she was even married. My shoulders tensed as the memory replayed. I built a life on the principle that loyalty matters, that promises should be kept. Now I'm ensuring her house of lies collapses under its own weight. Loyalty isn't something you beg for. It's a boundary you enforce. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. I stood at the kitchen sink, up to my elbows in suds, scrubbing away at a particularly stubborn spot on our good casserole dish. Quiet, methodical. That was my way. A baseball game played on the little countertop TV, just loud enough to hear the crack of the bat and the murmur of the announcers. The normalcy of the moment made what came next all the more jarring. The front door opened without the customary "I'm home." I didn't need to turn around to know it was Heather. Her perfume, stronger than usual lately, drifted through the house before she did. "Don't stop on my account," she said, her voice carrying a strange lightness. "I'm just grabbing a few things." I glanced over my shoulder, dish towel still in hand. Heather stood there with an empty cardboard box tucked under one arm and something else tucked in her expression. Satisfaction. Like she'd already won whatever game she was playing. "Didn't realize you needed a box to grab your gym stuff," I said, turning back to the sink. My hands kept working even as my mind raced ahead. Her heels clicked across the tile as she approached. She set the box on the counter and leaned against it, making sure I had to look at her. At the new leather jacket she'd started wearing last month, at the smirk pulling at her lips. "I'm moving in with Greg," she announced, fishing in her pocket before tossing her house key onto the counter with a metallic clink. "We'll need to sell the house. 50-50 split seems fair." The dish in my hands nearly slipped. I set it in the rack carefully, buying time as my chest tightened. "You don't get to decide that like it's a yard sale," I said, keeping my voice steady as I dried my hands. "That's not how this works." Heather rolled her eyes, already bored with my response. "Don't be dramatic, Jonathan. Greg and I have chemistry. You and I had—" She paused, searching for the word. "A mortgage." I laughed once, hard. The sound surprised even me. Chemistry blows up labs. Mortgages build lives. "See? That's exactly what I'm talking about." She pushed away from the counter. "You think in terms of security and savings accounts? I want to feel alive." "And Greg makes you feel alive?" I asked, folding the dish towel with deliberate care. "Yes." Her eyes flashed with something that looked like triumph. "He does." I placed the folded towel on the counter, aligning its edges with the tile grout. "So alive that you didn't even tell him you were married." Her smile faltered for just a second. "He knows now. It doesn't matter. We're selling this place, and I'm taking half. My parents will help me until you calm down and see reason." "That's funny," I said, "because Walter and Joan told me they're worried about how much you've been disappearing lately. Did you know your dad called me last week when you missed Sunday dinner again? And if you try to make them choose between us, you'll lose more than you think." The smile thinned on her face. "You're not scary." "I don't have to be," I said. "I just have to be honest." She reached for the box. "Whatever. We're done here." I opened a drawer and pulled out the calendar where I'd marked every night she'd claimed to be working late over the past 3 months. "We're done when we're both honest about what happened, starting with these nights." I tapped the red-circled dates. "Every time you said you were stuck at the office. Every time I stayed up waiting." "You're controlling," she spat. "You've always been controlling. Keeping track isn't controlling. It's self-preservation." "And boring," she added, her voice rising. "God, Jonathan, you're so boring. Did you know that? Dishes and baseball games and the same dinner rotation every week." I matched her energy but kept my voice level. "Boring is what keeps doors locked and bills paid. Boring built this house you want half of." She grabbed the box and started toward the hallway, then spun back around. "Greg makes me feel alive," she hissed. "You don't get to burn down a marriage to feel a spark," I countered, my hands pressed flat against the counter to stop them from shaking. She disappeared down the hall. I heard her yanking things from drawers, the closet door slamming. 10 minutes later, she stormed past me with the box now filled with clothes and jewelry, her leather jacket pulled tight around her like armor. "I'll be back for the rest," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Not without calling first," I replied. "This isn't a storage unit." She paused at the door, looking back as if there might be something worth saying. Then she shook her head and walked out, leaving the door ajar behind her. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. The baseball game continued in the background, the announcer's voice rising with excitement over a play I no longer cared about. The house felt suddenly impossibly large around me. Slowly, I walked to the front door, still hanging open to the evening air. I stared through it, watching Heather's taillights disappear down our street. Was this it? 6 years of marriage, evaporated in a 10-minute conversation over a box and a house key? Had everything we built just ended that simply? I woke to sunlight streaming through blinds I'd forgotten to close. For a split second, everything felt normal. Then memory crashed down like a wave. I rolled over to face Heather's empty side of the bed, sheets still pulled tight the way I'd left them yesterday morning. No impression, no wrinkle, just absence. The silence in the house pressed against my ears as I shuffled to the kitchen. Out of habit, I set up the coffee maker for 2 cups before catching myself and adjusting the water level. The machine gurgled to life, its familiar sound somehow hollow in the quiet. Standing in the hallway, waiting for the coffee to brew, I caught the faint scent of Heather's perfume lingering on the air. The scent that used to welcome me home now felt like a ghost haunting the corners of rooms she'd abandoned. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Joan, Heather's mother. No messages. The coffee finished, and I poured a single cup, staring at the phone. Finally, I called back. "Jonathan," Joan's voice was strained. "We need to talk. Can you come over this afternoon?" "I'll be there," I promised. "Walter wants to speak with you." "And?" She hesitated. "Heather will be here." My stomach tightened. "I'll still be there." After showering and forcing down some toast, I spent the morning in a fog, moving through the motions of straightening up, doing laundry, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind spun in circles. At 2 o'clock, I pulled into Walter and Joan's driveway. Their modest 2-story had always felt more like home than any place I'd lived before meeting Heather. Now I sat in the car, wondering if I still belonged here. Joan opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a tight hug. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I nodded, unable to find words that wouldn't crack in my throat. Walter stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He gave my shoulder a firm squeeze, Walter's version of a hug. "Heather's in the kitchen," he said, his voice low. "She's been giving her mother an earful about how we need to stay out of it." The kitchen door swung open, and there she was, Heather, still wearing that damn leather jacket despite the warm day, arms crossed defensively. "Great," she muttered. "The gang's all here." Walter turned to face his daughter. "Sit down." "Dad, Sit. Down." Something in his tone made her comply, though her posture remained rigid. Walter remained standing, hands gripping the back of a chair. "Your mother and I want to understand something. Did you tell this Greg fellow you were single?" Heather's eyes flicked to me, then back to her father. "That's between Greg and me." "Not anymore," Walter countered. "Not when you're tearing apart a marriage and asking us to support you." "I'm not asking for your support," Heather snapped. "I'm telling you what's happening. Jonathan and I are over. Greg didn't even know you were married." Walter's voice rose. "Your mother ran into his sister at Kroger yesterday. She said Greg was devastated to find out you'd been lying to him." I felt the floor shift under me. Joan placed her hand on my arm, steadying. "It wasn't like that," Heather insisted, color rising in her cheeks. "I was going to tell him once things were settled." "So you lied to him," Walter stated flatly. "Just like you've been lying to Jonathan, just like you're lying to us right now." "You're taking his side?" Heather pointed at me, voice rising. "He's not even your family." Joan stepped forward. "He's been our son for 6 years, Heather. And right now, he's the only one being honest." Heather stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "I don't need this. I don't need any of you." She grabbed her purse. "When you're ready to actually support me instead of judging me, call. Until then, stay out of my business." The front door slammed behind her, leaving a heavy silence in the kitchen. Walter sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "I'm sorry you had to see that, Jonathan." "Thank you," I said quietly. "Both of you, for standing up for me. This isn't over. Walter warned, reaching for Joan's hand across the table. She's angry now, but when that passes, she'll start making demands. You need to protect yourself. Joan nodded. We love our daughter, but what she's doing isn't right. I drove home in a daze, their words echoing in my head. By evening, I was sitting at my kitchen table, pushing food around a plate I couldn't bring myself to eat from. The empty chair across from me felt more present than anything else in the room, a space defined by absence. I'd lived alone before Heather. I knew how to exist in my own company. But this wasn't the same. This was half a life, half a conversation, half a meal prepared out of habit for two. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I hadn't heard a car pull up. When I opened the door, Harper stood on my porch, holding a brown paper bag that smelled of Chinese takeout. Her expression was a careful mix of concern and hesitation. "Hey," she said softly, "I thought you might not want to cook tonight." I stared at Harper for a long moment, my brain working to catch up with this unexpected kindness. "Come in," I finally managed, stepping aside. She walked past me, the familiar floral scent she'd always worn briefly cutting through the emptiness of the house. Unlike Heather's perfume that announced itself like a fanfare, Harper's was subtle, like fresh laundry hung in spring air. "I hope you like General Tso's," she said, setting the bag on the kitchen table where my half-eaten dinner sat abandoned. "And I brought extra egg rolls because—" She paused, glancing at my plate. "Well, because egg rolls make everything a tiny bit better." I closed the door and followed her into the kitchen. "Thanks. You didn't have to do this." "Have you eaten?" she asked, ignoring my protest as she began unpacking containers. I gestured toward my plate with its sad pile of reheated pasta. "Sort of." Harper nodded, understanding without judgment. She cleared my plate away and set out the takeout containers with practiced efficiency. I watched her move around my kitchen, Heather's sister, yet so different from her in every meaningful way. "How are you holding up?" she asked, sliding into the chair across from me. The chair Heather had vacated, but somehow it didn't feel like a replacement. Just different. I reached for an egg roll, buying time. "I've been better." "I bet." She opened her container. "Mom called me after everything went down at their place today." I tensed. "If you're here to defend Heather—" "I'm not," she cut in firmly. "I'm here because I thought you might need someone to talk to who isn't my parents and who isn't—" She waved her chopsticks vaguely. "Involved in all this." But she was involved. She was Heather's sister. As if reading my mind, Harper added, "Look, I love my sister, but that doesn't mean I think what she's doing is okay." We ate in silence for a few minutes. The food was good, better than anything I would have managed for myself tonight. I hadn't realized how hungry I actually was until I started eating. "Thank you," I said finally, "for the food, and for checking on me." She smiled slightly. "That's what family does." Am I still family? The question hung between us, heavier than I'd intended. "To my parents?" "Absolutely," she answered without hesitation. "To me?" She shrugged. "You've been my brother-in-law for 6 years. That doesn't just disappear because Heather's having some kind of whatever this is." The conversation shifted to safer topics after that. Work, the unseasonable weather. A funny story about her coworker's new puppy. Gradually, I felt the knot in my chest loosening. Not gone, but less constricting. Hours passed. The takeout containers emptied. We moved from the kitchen to the living room, where Harper curled up on one end of the couch while I sat in my usual armchair. "I never understood it, you know," she said suddenly. "Understood what?" "Why Heather was always pushing you away." Harper traced the pattern on a throw pillow with her finger. "The way she talked sometimes, like you were holding her back or something. I never got it." I stared at my hands. I didn't either. Not until she was actually gone. "Were there signs that you missed?" I thought about it, really thought. Maybe. Probably. But nothing that said, "I'm planning to leave you for someone who doesn't know I'm married." The bitterness leaked into my voice despite my efforts. "I'm sorry," Harper said softly. "I still can't believe she did that to both of you." "Both of us?" "You and Greg. Neither of you deserve to be lied to." It was strange hearing someone acknowledge that Heather had wronged not just me, but the man she left me for. The clock on the wall showed nearly midnight when Harper finally stood. "I should go. Let you get some rest." I walked her to the door, suddenly reluctant to return to the silence of the house. "I'll stop by again," she promised, pausing on the threshold. Maybe bring some actual groceries next time. Your fridge looked pretty bare. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she offered a small smile. I want to, if that's okay. I nodded. It's okay. I watched her walk to her car, waited until her taillights disappeared down the street before closing the door. Back in the kitchen, I gathered the empty containers, surprised at how much we'd eaten. More surprising was how much lighter I felt, even if just temporarily. I sank back into my chair, tilting my head to stare at the ceiling. For the first time since Heather dropped her bombshell, I felt something other than shock or anger. I wondered if Heather had any idea how badly she'd miscalculated, not just in leaving, but in assuming everyone would see things her way, that her parents would take her side, that I would crumble, that she was the only one who mattered in this equation. I called Ms. Patel first thing the next morning, half expecting to get her receptionist. Instead, she picked up on the second ring. "Jonathan Braden," she said, recognizing my number. "I had a feeling I'd be hearing from you today. Can you come in at 10? Her office was downtown, a modest suite with good lighting and minimal decor. The conference room had a single plant in the corner that looked like it had survived multiple administrations. Ms. Patel didn't waste time with small talk. She sat across from me, legal pad ready, pen in hand. "Tell me everything," she said. From the beginning. I laid it all out. Heather's announcement, the lies to Greg, her demands about the house, the confrontation with her parents. Ms. Patel took notes in quick, efficient strokes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "You've been married for how long?" 6 years, I said. "Together for 8. Joint accounts?" "One for household expenses. Separate accounts for our personal spending and savings." She nodded approvingly. "That simplifies things." When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Here's what you need to do, Jonathan. Document everything. Every text, every email, every phone call. Note the time, date, and content. Keep all receipts, not just for big purchases, but everything. Groceries, utilities, home maintenance." She slid a fresh legal pad across the table to me. "If she tries to contact you directly, respond only through me, no exceptions. No matter how angry she makes you, no matter what accusations she throws, everything goes through legal channels now." I must have looked skeptical, because she added, "This isn't about being petty. This is about protecting yourself. If Heather's willing to lie to you and this Greg person, she's capable of lying about anything. Even to a judge? Especially to a judge." Ms. Patel's expression hardened slightly. "I've seen it more times than I can count. By the time I left her office, I had a detailed action plan and a weight off my shoulders. Someone competent was in my corner, someone who'd seen this play out before. I spent the afternoon compiling bank records, printing text message logs, and creating a timeline of the past few months. It was surprising how clearly Heather's deception stood out once I put it all together. Late nights that aligned perfectly with Greg's work schedule, cash withdrawals she couldn't account for, weekend girls' trips that none of her friends seemed to know about. I was labeling folders when my phone buzzed, then buzzed again. And again. Heather's name flashed on the screen, followed by a cascade of text messages, each one more agitated than the last. "Did you seriously get a lawyer? You're so controlling, I just want to move on with my life. Why are you making this difficult? My attorney says I'm entitled to half of everything, answer me." The texts continued until midnight, veering between accusations and self-pity. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I took screenshots and forwarded the entire thread to Ms. Patel with the subject line, "As instructed." Her reply came minutes later. "Perfect. Keep it up." The next day, I was pushing a cart through the produce section at Marshall's grocery when I spotted Harper examining avocados. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Jonathan, hey." She dropped an avocado in her basket. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I admitted. "I got a lawyer." "Good." She nodded firmly. "That's really good." We were comparing notes on which tomatoes looked best when I sensed a shift in the air. Harper's expression tightened, her eyes focusing on something behind me. I turned to find Heather standing there, a basket dangling from her arm, her face twisted with fury. "Well, isn't this cozy?" she said, her voice carrying across the produce section. "My sister and my husband shopping together." "Ex-husband, soon enough," I corrected quietly. She ignored me, rounding on Harper instead. "I expected better from you. Family loyalty means nothing?" Harper remained calm. "I'm being loyal to the family member who deserves it." He turned Mom and Dad against me, Heather hissed, stepping closer to Harper. And now he's got you wrapped around his finger too? Several shoppers had stopped to watch. An elderly woman with a cart full of cat food was openly staring. Jonathan is still mine, Heather spat, jabbing a finger toward Harper. He'll always be mine. This little rebellion of his is temporary. Harper didn't flinch. She met Heather's gaze steadily and said, just loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear, "Not anymore." The simplicity of it, those two words, seemed to hit Heather harder than any argument could have. Her face flushed, and for a second, I thought she might actually lunge at her sister. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed off, abandoning her basket in the middle of the aisle. Harper and I exchanged a look, not of triumph, but of shared resilience. "Well," she said finally, "that was dramatic." We finished shopping and walked out to the parking lot together, loading our bags into separate cars. "Thanks," I said, "for what you said in there." Harper shrugged. "I only said the truth." That evening, I sat at my desk with all of Heather's texts printed out chronologically. I arranged them in a neat folder labeled Evidence, placed it in my filing cabinet, and closed the drawer with a definitive click. I showed up at Walter and Joan's place that Saturday with a toolbox and work gloves. Their front porch railing had been wobbly for months, and with everything going on, it felt good to have something I could actually fix. "Been meaning to tackle this myself," Walter said, settling into a lawn chair beside me as I removed the loose balusters. He handed me a level when I reached for it, almost before I asked. "Just never got around to it." "No problem," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead with my forearm. "Keeps my mind busy." The sun beat down on my back as I worked, measuring and cutting replacement pieces for the sections that were beyond repair. Walter mostly watched, occasionally passing me tools and making small talk about the weather and the neighborhood. But I could feel the tension underneath, like a low electrical hum. "She always was stubborn," he finally said, after nearly an hour of avoiding the subject. "Even as a little girl. But this—" He shook his head, staring at the yard. "This isn't stubborn. It's selfish." I focused on driving a screw into the fresh wood. "It's not your fault, Walter." "Didn't say it was," he snorted. "But I raised her. Makes you wonder what went wrong." "Some people just make their choices," I said, testing the new section of railing with a firm shake. It held solid. The screen door creaked, and Joan appeared with a tray of glasses, condensation beading on the sides. "Thought you boys could use some iced tea," she said, setting the tray on the small table next to Walter. I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she arranged the glasses. "Thanks, Joan," I said, taking off my gloves and accepting a glass. The cold tea felt like heaven going down. Joan lingered, fidgeting with her wedding ring. "Jonathan, I want you to know how sorry I am. You don't need to apologize for Heather. I know that." She sat down heavily in the empty chair. "But I feel torn apart. She's my daughter, but what she's done—" Her voice caught. "The lies she told that poor man, Greg, and the things she's saying about you now." She shook her head. "I can't defend it. I won't." Walter reached over and covered her hand with his. "We raised them both the same way. One turned out right." "Harper?" Joan said with a sad smile. I nodded, feeling a tightness in my chest at the mention of her name. "We worked for another hour before finishing the railing. It looked better than new. I'd reinforced the structure and added some decorative elements that matched their house perfectly." Walter clapped me on the shoulder, his way of saying thanks without having to find the words. I was washing up in their bathroom when I heard another car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Harper getting out, carrying what looked like takeout bags. When I came downstairs, she was setting containers on the dining room table, laughing at something her father said. "Hope you don't mind," Joan said to me. "I invited Harper to join us for dinner. After all your hard work, you should have a proper meal." "Of course not," I said, surprised at how quickly my mood had lifted. We sat around the table, passing containers of Thai food. For the first time in days, the conversation flowed naturally. Walter told stories about fishing trips from years ago. Joan mentioned the new garden she was planning for the spring. Harper talked about a photography class she was taking downtown. No one mentioned Heather. It was like collectively agreeing to take a deep breath. After dinner, Harper and I ended up on the porch while her parents cleaned up inside despite our offers to help. The evening air had cooled, and the new railing gleamed with fresh stain in the porch light. "Nice work," Harper said, running her hand along the smooth wood. "Dad's been talking about fixing this for 2 years." "Gave me something useful to do with my hands," I said, leaning against one of the posts. "How have you been holding up with all this?" She gave me a look. Shouldn't I be asking you that question? I shrugged. I'm doing better than I expected. It's strange, but I feel calmer now than I have in months. That makes sense, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Living with someone who's lying to you is exhausting. Even when you don't know they're lying, you feel it somewhere in your body. I thought about that for a moment. Yeah, that's exactly it. We stood in comfortable silence, listening to crickets starting their evening chorus. I'm glad, Harper said suddenly. Glad? To see you breathe again. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. You're different already. Lighter. I hadn't realized it until she said it, but she was right. The constant knot in my stomach had begun to loosen. The tension headaches were less frequent. I was sleeping through the night again. Thank you, I said, for checking in on me, for the dinners. You didn't have to do any of that. I wanted to, she said simply. When it was time to leave, I walked Harper to her car. The motion sensor light illuminated the driveway as she unlocked her door and turned to face me. Same time next week? She asked. I think Mom's planning a roast. I'd like that, I said. I watched as she got in and drove away, the sound of gravel crunching under her tires hanging in the air long after her taillights disappeared down the road. Standing there in the half-dark, I felt something shift inside me, not the sharp pain of loss, but something gentler, more hopeful. Was something quietly forming between us? The thought didn't scare me like I thought it might. Instead, it felt like finding an unexpected path when you thought you were lost in the woods. 3 peaceful weeks passed. I'd settled into a routine that felt almost normal. Work during the day, quiet evenings at home, and regular dinners with Harper or Walter and Joan. The divorce paperwork was moving along, and while it wasn't exactly smooth sailing, I'd started to believe the worst was behind me. Then came Thursday night. I was washing dishes, sleeves rolled up and hands deep in soapy water, when the doorbell rang. Not the polite double press that Harper used, but a single hard jab followed by insistent knocking. I dried my hands, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. Heather. My stomach clenched as I opened the door. She stood on my porch, our porch, mascara streaked down her cheeks, eyes wild, that leather jacket hanging open over clothes that looked slept in. What do you want, Heather? I kept my voice steady, one hand still on the door, ready to close it. Let me in. She pushed past me, the scent of wine following her. We need to talk. No, we don't. You need to leave. She ignored me, stalking into the kitchen where she spun around, her face contorted with rage I hadn't seen before. Greg won't even answer my calls, she spat. Do you know why? Because when he found out about the divorce, about our marriage, he ghosted me. Completely. She laughed, a high, brittle sound. He thought I was single, Jonathan. When he learned the truth, he called me a liar and blocked my number. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping distance between us. And this concerns me how? You ruined it. Her voice rose. You ruined everything. You told Walter and Joan, and they told his cousin, and word got back to Greg. You just couldn't let me be happy, could you? You lied to him, Heather. That's on you. I was going to tell him. When the time was right. I shook my head. There's never a right time to admit you've been lying to someone from day one. She paced the kitchen, her boots loud against the tile floor. This was the kitchen where we'd cooked Sunday breakfasts, where we'd danced to the radio on rainy evenings. Now it felt like a stage for her performance. I lost my apartment, she continued. Greg was helping with the rent, and now I had to move in with a coworker. I'm sleeping on a futon, Jonathan. A futon. I'm sorry that's happening to you. I wasn't. Not really, but saying it seemed easiest. No, you're not. She slammed her hand on the table, making the salt and pepper shakers jump. You're loving this. You and Harper both. The mention of Harper's name in her mouth made my jaw tighten. Leave Harper out of this. Oh, please. My sister in my house, sitting in my chair, playing house with my husband. Ex-husband, I corrected. And this isn't your house anymore. Her eyes narrowed, suddenly calculating despite the mascara tracks. If I can't be happy, neither will you. The words hung in the air between us, cold and deliberate. You need to leave, Heather. Now. Or what? You'll call the police on your wife? She laughed again. I'm going. Don't worry. But this isn't over. She brushed past me, pausing at the door. Check your email tomorrow. My lawyer will be in touch. The door slammed behind her, rattling in its frame. I stood in the silent kitchen, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever calm I'd managed to build these past weeks felt suddenly fragile. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:30. Ms. Patel's name flashed on the screen. "Jonathan," she said without preamble, "Heather's attorney filed motions this morning. She's alleging misconduct and hidden financial accounts." My stomach sank. "That's ridiculous. I don't have hidden accounts." "I know, but we'll need to fight this. She's trying to delay the process and increase your legal fees." Ms. Patel's voice was calm but serious. "I need you to gather all your financial records from the past 5 years. Bank statements, tax returns, investment accounts, everything. I'll send it all today," I promised. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at nothing. The coffee in my mug grew cold as I calculated how much this would cost me, not just in money, but in peace of mind. By afternoon, I'd sent Ms. Patel everything she requested and was pacing my living room, too restless to work, too angry to relax. The doorbell rang, 2 gentle presses. Harper. She stood on the porch holding a casserole dish, but her smile faded when she saw my face. "What happened?" she asked, stepping inside. I took the dish from her hands and set it on the counter before telling her about Heather's visit and the legal motions. "She's trying to bleed me dry," I concluded, "and drag this out as long as possible." Harper sat at the kitchen table, her expression thoughtful. "What does Ms. Patel think?" "That we fight with evidence. Truth against lies." She nodded. "That's all you can do. And I'm here, Jonathan. Whatever you need." The simple promise settled something in me. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My hands gripped the countertop, knuckles white. I wouldn't let Heather's chaos consume me. I wouldn't let her lies win. If she wanted a fight, she'd get one, but on my terms, with truth as my weapon. I spent the next morning hunched over my kitchen table, sorting through bank statements, investment records, tax returns, anything that could prove I wasn't hiding money. It felt surreal going through our financial life like this, seeing the patterns of our marriage laid out in numbers. Around noon, Ms. Patel arrived, her briefcase bulging with folders. She took one look at my bleary eyes and sighed. "When did you start working on this?" she asked, setting her coffee on the table. "4 this morning." I handed her the stack I'd organized. "Couldn't sleep?" "That's understandable." She flipped through the documents with practiced efficiency. "This is good, very thorough." For the next 3 hours, we built our case piece by piece. Ms. Patel created a timeline of our accounts, highlighting every transaction that matched our joint expenses. "What about these text messages?" She pointed to my phone. "You mentioned Heather admitted lying to Greg?" I scrolled through my messages, finding the exchange from 2 weeks ago. Heather had been defensive, typing in all caps. "It's not my fault Greg assumed I was single. I just never corrected him." "This is excellent," Ms. Patel said, making a copy. "She admits the deception right here." My calendar came next. I'd marked every night Heather claimed to be working late over the past 6 months. The pattern was damning when laid against Greg's name. "We'll need statements from others," Ms. Patel said, closing her laptop. "People who witnessed her behavior or her admissions." I nodded. Her father already offered. And Harper. The mention of Harper made Ms. Patel's eyebrow lift slightly. "Be careful there. Heather might try to spin this as you and her sister—" "There's nothing to spin," I said firmly. "Harper's been a friend when I needed one. That's all." Ms. Patel nodded, though her eyes remained skeptical. "All the same, any statement from Harper should be precise about timeline and context." After Ms. Patel left, I called Walter. His voice was gruff but certain as he promised to write a letter that evening. "I won't let her lies stand," he said. "Not against you, not against anyone." Harper stopped by after work, her expression serious as she sat at my kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared so many quiet dinners these past weeks. "Ms. Patel says I should make a statement," she said, tapping her fingers nervously against her coffee mug. "About when I started coming over. Only if you're comfortable with it." She shook her head. "It's not about comfort. It's about truth." She pulled out a notepad and began writing, her handwriting neat and deliberate. I watched as she carefully noted dates, times, who else was present during our early conversations. "I'm not letting her paint this as something it wasn't," Harper said, signing the bottom of the page. By evening, we had our arsenal of truth. Ms. Patel collected everything with a satisfied nod. This should be enough to counter her claims. The final piece was harder, facing Heather directly, One last attempt at dignity before we let the courts decide. Walter suggested neutral ground, their home, with them present. "Maybe she'll behave if we're there," he said, not sounding convinced himself. I arrived early, settling into the living room where family photos still showed happier times. Joan brought out coffee, her hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. Harper arrived next, giving me a small nod before sitting beside her mother. Then came the sound of Heather's car in the driveway, the slam of her door. She walked in with heat in her eyes, leather jacket tight around her shoulders like armor. "Really? Everyone against me?" She threw her purse onto the couch. "No one's against you," Joan began. "Save it." Heather looked directly at me. "You're a joke. You always were. Harper is just bored." I met her gaze, keeping my voice steady but sharp. "You can call me a joke from the sidewalk. Inside, I'm the man who doesn't lie, the one who doesn't have to trick strangers into loving me, and the man who won't let you turn your mistakes into my punishment." Her face flushed red. She pointed a shaking finger at Harper. "You're dead to me." Harper squared her shoulders, her voice calm but firm. "You made that choice when you lied to Greg and left your husband." The tension in the room was suffocating. Heather opened her mouth for another attack when Walter stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Enough!" His voice filled the room, deep and final. The words seemed to echo against the walls, silencing everything else. A week crawled by. I spent it finalizing documents, reviewing statements, and trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. The night before mediation, I barely slept, my mind racing through every conversation, every text message, every moment that had led to this final showdown. The county courthouse stood cold and imposing in the morning light. Ms. Patel met me at the steps, her briefcase bulging with evidence. "Remember," she said, straightening her blazer, "let me do the talking. Stay calm, no matter what she says." I nodded, swallowing hard. The marble floors echoed with our footsteps as we headed to the mediation room. Heather was already there with her attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit. She wore a conservative dress I'd never seen before, her hair pulled back, playing the part of the wronged wife. Our eyes met briefly before she looked away, chin lifted. The mediator, Judge Calloway, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s. She reviewed our case file, eyes narrowing as she flipped through pages. "Let's begin," she said, setting down her glasses. "Ms. Patel, your client's position?" Ms. Patel stood, poised and methodical. She laid out the timeline: our marriage, Heather's affair, her abandonment, and subsequent false claims. "Mr. Braden maintains that the marital home should remain his property, as should his business interests, which predated the marriage. Mrs. Braden abandoned the home voluntarily and under false pretenses to her paramour." Heather shifted in her seat, color rising in her cheeks. Then came the evidence. Ms. Patel produced bank statements showing Heather's excessive spending during the months of her affair. Next came the calendar with Heather's late nights, meticulously documented. "And most damning," Ms. Patel continued, sliding forward a printed page, "Mrs. Braden's own admission in writing that she deliberately misled Mr. Gregory Thompson about her marital status." The mediator examined the text message. "It's not my fault. Greg assumed I was single. I just never corrected him." Heather's attorney attempted to dismiss it. "This proves nothing about financial matters. It speaks to character and credibility," Ms. Patel countered. "Mrs. Braden has demonstrated a pattern of dishonesty that extends to her current claims about hidden assets." Judge Calloway turned to Heather's side. "Your response?" Heather's attorney began a rehearsed speech about emotional abandonment and shared property. Halfway through, Heather interrupted him. "He turned my sister against me," she blurted, pointing at me. "They've been—" "Mrs. Braden," Judge Calloway cut in sharply, "your allegations about your sister and your husband have been addressed in the affidavits." She held up Harper's statement. "Unless you have evidence contradicting these signed testimonies, I suggest we focus on the financial matters at hand." Heather's face flushed deeper. Her attorney whispered something to her, but she shook him off. I kept my expression neutral, just as Ms. Patel had coached me. Inside, I felt something loosening, a knot of tension I'd carried for months. After 2 hours of back and forth, Judge Calloway leaned back in her chair. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm inclined to rule as follows. Mr. Braden retains the marital home and his business interests. Mrs. Braden keeps her vehicle and personal possessions." She looked directly at Heather. "The credit card debt accumulated in the 6 months prior to separation falls to Mrs. Braden." Heather's attorney began to protest, but Judge Calloway held up her hand. Furthermore, given the nature of Mrs. Braden's claims and their lack of substantiation, I'm ordering her to pay 30% of Mr. Braden's legal fees. The room fell silent. I felt my hands trembling slightly under the table. We'll review the final settlement agreement once it's drafted, Judge Calloway concluded, gathering her papers. That will be all. Outside the courthouse, Ms. Patel shook my hand. It went as well as we could have hoped, she said, allowing herself a small smile. The paperwork should be ready to sign next week. I drove home in a daze, the weight of months finally lifting. The house felt different when I walked in, truly mine again. Harper came over that evening with takeout, just as she had so many nights before. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence comfortable between us. It's really over, I said, still not quite believing it. Harper nodded. You stood your ground. Not many would have. My phone chimed with an email notification. I glanced down, then pushed it toward Harper without opening it. It's from her, I said. Harper picked up the phone, reading aloud. Jonathan, I've been thinking about everything. Maybe we can start over, talk things through. What we had wasn't all bad. Call me. Cheech. She looked up at me, one eyebrow raised. Delete it, I said. Harper's thumb hovered over the screen for a moment. You sure? Never been more sure of anything. She pressed delete, then set the phone down. Gone. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled sharply. The sound seemed to fill the kitchen, not with grief or anger, but with release. For the first time in months, I felt Heather's grip breaking, her power over my emotions finally slipping away. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall. Outside, a light rain began to fall. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen on a Saturday morning, breathing in the steam from my coffee mug. The house was quiet, not the hollow silence that followed Heather's exit, but the peaceful kind that comes when you're comfortable in your own skin again. I didn't have to rush through breakfast or monitor my words, waiting for the next argument to erupt. Harper sat at the table, flipping through a magazine and sipping her tea. Sunlight caught in her hair, turning the edges gold. She'd been coming over for dinner most evenings, and we'd fallen into an easy routine of cooking together, talking about our days, sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. For months, we'd operated in this comfortable limbo, closer than friends, but neither of us pushing for more. Not while the divorce was still raw, not while Heather's ghost still lingered between us. But the papers were long signed now, the house firmly mine, and that morning, something shifted inside me. I sat down across from her, set my mug on the table, and reached for her hand. Maybe we stop pretending this is just friendship, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Harper looked up, her fingers warm against mine. She didn't seem surprised, just patient, like she'd been waiting for me to catch up to what she already knew. I was wondering when you'd say that, she replied, a slow smile spreading across her face. I didn't want to rush you. I'm not rushing, I said. I'm finally catching up. Those words marked the beginning of something deliberate. We dated properly. Dinners out instead of takeout containers, movies where we actually watched the screen, weekend drives with no destination. It wasn't the frantic passion Heather had chased with Greg. It was something that built slowly, brick by brick, with honesty as its foundation. 3 months later, I took Harper to the lake where Walter had once brought us fishing. It was the place where I'd first laughed again after Heather left. Really laughed, not the hollow sound I'd been making. We walked along the shore, skipping stones across the water, talking about nothing important. When the sun started to set, painting the water orange and gold, I stopped and turned to her. I never thought I'd be here again, I said quietly. Not just at this lake, but in this place in my life, where I could trust someone completely. I pulled the small box from my pocket and watched her eyes widen. When I opened it, the simple diamond caught the fading light. I don't want to waste any more time, I said. Will you marry me? Her yes was immediate, her arms around my neck before I could even slip the ring on her finger. Walter and Joan cried when we told them, not the broken tears they'd shed during Heather's exit, but the relieved kind that comes when something torn finally mends. They gave us their blessing with quiet dignity, Joan squeezing my hand and whispering, "Thank you for still believing in us." Walter clapped me on the shoulder later, when the women were in the kitchen. "Someone in this family still stands for truth," he said gruffly. "That matters more than you know." While our life rebuilt itself, Heather's crumbled further. Greg had vanished completely once he learned the truth about her marriage. She'd moved to a cramped apartment across town, working shifts she complained about constantly to anyone who would listen. Joan checked on her weekly, bringing groceries and listening to Heather's revised version of events where everyone else was to blame. But Heather couldn't seem to let go. She started driving past our house, slowing down just enough to make sure we noticed. Late-night calls came in, only to end in silence when I answered. Bitter texts appeared on Harper's phone, accusing us of betrayal, as if we had been the ones who lied. We responded the same way every time, with nothing. No arguments, no explanations, no fuel for her drama. Harper and I agreed. Heather thrived on chaos, and we wouldn't provide it. "She wants a reaction," Harper said one night, deleting another rambling message. "That's the one thing we won't give her." If you're listening and you've been where I stood, hands full of a life someone else decided to drop, hear this from a man who isn't fancy, just stubborn. Build the house, set the boundaries, tell the truth out loud. Revenge doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like peace, and a life your betrayer has to see through the fence but can't touch, no matter how much they keep clawing at it. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.